I was going to do a different video focusing on 2026 today, but a comment in my past video from the ever-astute Politiclank made me decide to look at how Nintendo will deal with the emergence of the absolute megaton hit that is Grand Theft Auto 6 this year, and specifically in the pre-Thanksgiving slot. Firstly, some context. GTA 5 released on the 17th of September 2013 and racked up 1 billion in sales within the space of just a few days. Pulling off a Nintendo-style launch just before the holiday season didn't seem to phase it, but this time Rockstar Games has staked out the most prestigious slot in the calendar for their 6th entry, the last Thursday before the American Thanksgiving holiday and the explosive Black Friday sales event that follows. With the exception of 2025, the Pokémon Company has tended to stake out this territory, and generally Nintendo hasn't had to worry too much about truly massive event games elsewhere eating into their ambitious plans. Is there evidence that they might flinch this time, though? Well, it's logical that they would. One, as pointed out by Politiclank, is the shelf space issue and the limited capacity to launch two concurrent major event games in stores. Although in a Japanese market situation where Pokemon is much bigger and GTA has less cultural impact, they might be able to hold the date just fine for Pokemon. I think it could be a far bigger issue in the West. Plus, the Pokemon Company may feel less wedded to the date as Black Friday is less of a significant thing outside the US market, despite it becoming more notorious through American mega chains like Amazon promoting it worldwide. All things considered, the specific date of the 19th of November 2026 would be a tight one. Has Nintendo blinked in the past? Well, certainly in 2013, they launched the US versions of both Wonderful 101 and Wii Party U less than a week either side, and while neither were exactly mega blockbusters, Wii Party U was evidently something they aspired to be a fairly major plank of their casual lineup. Fitness Boxing was launched the week before Cyberpunk's December 2020 debut. They did leave a substantial gap for Red Dead Redemption 2's launch in 2018, but then again, 2018's Switch release schedule was patchy at the best of times, so this might not be the best comparison point. It's also worth pointing out that they cleared the slate for Monster Hunter Rise in March 2021, and Hollow Knight Silksong pretty much had a free run from Nintendo competition during September 2025, although of course both of those games were actually on the Nintendo Switch and Switch 2. However, I think there is one play that they might consider worth making with Pokémon, and that's the Barbenheimer maneuver. On the 21st of July 2023, both Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer film and Greta Gerwig's Barbie ended up scheduled for the same date. Neither side would blink, and it turned from a disaster into a kind of cultural moment, Barbenheimer, that briefly was credited for reviving interest in the flagging cinema viewership. And it strikes me that Pokémon is possibly the perfect such complement to Grand Theft Auto. GTA is a shamelessly adult series, and a great number of the people who are dedicated players of previous titles will now be well into adulthood, and a good number will be parents. Parents who may want something to keep their children occupied while they spend a significant amount of time on the vast new title. It's also an elegant way for Nintendo to hack their way into a conversation from which they previously would have been excluded. GTA will draw huge column inches and suck the oxygen out of the gaming conversation. But if Nintendo could piggyback onto this and put Pokemon in the same conversation at the same time, they could actually shoot the new Pokemon game to even higher levels of publicity than they might have otherwise managed. A huge new game, well, that's news. Two huge new games duking it out, well, that's a story. Two huge new games that contrast so markedly that they could potentially make a major social media moment, well, now we're getting somewhere. And what better for this than a brand new Pokemon game? If summer 2023 was the season of Barbenheimer, does this make winter 2026 the season of Poke Theft Auto? Now look, it's probably the case that the Pokemon Company won't pull the trigger on something like this. I suspect they're even more cautious than Nintendo about such things, and of course, many of the teens and 20-somethings who discovered GTA 5 were children and teenagers during the early days of Pokemon, and so there is a huge nostalgia overlap as well. But I also think Nintendo is in competition and won't want to see the November month too readily. In 2018, they had Pokémon Let's Go and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate only a few weeks apart, and I think this holiday it is very likely that they will have a major new Mario title to unveil as well. Theoretically, they could release these titles any time, but I think they will want the momentum going into the holiday, and they will want to give each title a fair amount of space either side for their own promotional purposes. I certainly don't think that they will vacate November. One other consideration, though, is that either title might move to a quite different slot. GTA 5 was a September game after all, and being delayed out of spring, and GTA 6 definitely doesn't need the Thanksgiving slot to rack up massive sales. It's far easier in publicity terms to move a game up than to move a game later, so while 19th of November is the absolute latest I could see them wanting to release it, if it were to be targeting this year, if the development were going sufficiently well, it feels plausible to me that Rockstar might want to own the conversation for a little longer, and so they could move it up and go for a September release once again. It's also possible that the game could be subject to yet another delay, of course. As for Pokémon, it's already more than 3 years since the last release, and the Pokémon Company are therefore in uncharted territory for them. Moving the game out of the holiday slot would be a huge deal, but Nintendo does like to have a massive July game for the Japanese summer break. Fire Emblem Three Houses, Xenoblade 3, Splatoon 2, Octopath Traveler, and others have all held this slot. It would also bring forward the potential Gen 11 date to 2029, 3 years and 4 months from the end of 2026, which would shave 8 months off the expected next game's development cycle, but this would be more consistent with the rigid 3-yearly scheduling of the generational Pokemon titles so far. Plus, if the leaks are accurate and the titles are indeed Wind and Waves, then what better month than July? This would be tricky in its own way, with Pokopia in March and, as people in the comments have pointed out, Pokemon Champions confirmed for the August Video Game Championships. It would seem unusually aggressive even for the Pokemon Company in their 30th anniversary year to have 3 Pokemon titles in the space of about 4 months. Another date with a possibility would be September, and especially if it were used as a launch game for a Nintendo Switch 2 Lite, something for which it would be ideally placed. But for one thing, Nintendo usually uses its wholly owned titles as a launch game, and for another, I'm not fully convinced they're ready to go for a Lite model quite so soon, although that is the topic for another video. One of the aspects about doing large numbers of forecasts in public is the capacity that I have to react to feedback and amend. If I've made a forecast, it gets assessed, come what may, but I always reserve the right to make new ones based on new information or new perspectives, irrespective of my previous thoughts. Therefore, while respect for the difficulties of the beleaguered retail outlets means I think probably a specific Barbenheimer showdown is less likely, I still give a 50% chance that Pokémon Gen 10 releases in November 2026, although I won't give a specific date. That said, if they were to pull a February surprise and put Wind and Waves alongside some actual Wind and Waves in July, well, that really would crack open the year in a major way. I'll be continuing my series of 2026 videos soon, although I also have other more research-based content that will be coming, so check out Patreon for lots of early access and timed exclusive content coming up. Thanks so much for watching, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.